You know, back when I was a kid, we didn't really have young adult books. I mean, we had books that dealt with similar themes and issues and plots, but we just called them teen books, you know, that they were books that were a little too risque for kids, even though I read them when I was a kid. I read things like Alex Rider when I was a kid, but they weren't really marketed towards adults. They were marketed towards, younger people. And then at some point in the last 10 or 15 years, we just started calling them young adult books or YA books. And I don't really know where that term came from, but once the term came around, it seems like the entire genre just moved itself into a little box. Specifically the genres of YA fantasy, YA sci-fi, and YA dystopia. And granted, there's a lot of overlap between these three, but I think they're distinct enough to each warrant being their own genre. And I mentioned in my Ash Princess review just a couple days ago that I was kind of done with all three of those genres for the time being. And really, I think you should all be done with it too, because we need to work together in order to fix this. So I just gotta explain the problem, explain how to fix it, and explain what you can do to help.
Part 1. The Basic Tropes.
Okay, stop me if you've heard this before. There's a teenage girl who's like a super badass for some reason. Like she's either a hunter, or like she fights in an underground ring, or she secretly has some sort of magic powers that she needs to hide, otherwise like the king or the Inquisition or somebody will come kill her. And she lives in some sort of oppressive regime, like an oppressive government or an oppressive dystopia, just something like that. And she thinks of herself as being very average or plain looking, but really when you hear the way she's described, you can't help but picture her as being extremely beautiful. And when they inevitably make a movie off of it, they cast somebody like Jennifer Lawrence or Shailene Woodley to play her. So this teenage girl protagonist makes friends with two boys, one of whom is a really nice guy, probably her childhood friend, possibly not, but usually she's someone he's known for a while. And she's starting to think that, hey, he's really cute and I kind of like him. But at the same time, she meets a new guy, who's probably some sort of ultra-hot, brooding bad boy sort of guy, possibly a rebel fighting against the oppressive regime, and she also thinks he's super cute, and she starts to form a relationship with him, and she leads both of them on. The badass teenage girl protagonist is perfectly content with her life. Even if she's not happy with it, she doesn't really want to rock the boat. But some sort of inciting incident happens which forces her to either change her views on things and decide she wants to start fighting against the oppressive government regime, or she is forced by some sort of circumstances to meet up with the rebellion and join them because they're her only allies or the only people that'll help her. And after she joins the rebellion, they start fighting wholesale against the oppressive government regime. They lose some friends along the way, they maybe question their humanity a bit, and they think, oh, what have I become? But at the end of the day, they do win, the oppressive government regime is overthrown, and the rebels take over and put up some sort of new, better government. Usually democratic in nature, but if it's fantasy, they'll usually restore, like, the rightful king to his throne or something. Now, those are some pretty broad strokes that I just painted this with, but I think you all knew what I was talking about. Like, there's a very specific formula to these books, and even books that don't follow all three of them big points, which is the teenage badass girl protagonist, the rebellion, and the love triangle. Even books that don't follow all three of them usually follow two of them. Like the Mortal Instruments, for example, doesn't really have a rebellion, but it still has the dreaded love triangle, and it still has the inexplicably badass teenage girl protagonist. So the problem isn't that these cliches and tropes exist, the problem is that they're used all the time and there's very little variation in them. However, like I said, they aren't necessarily bad. There are some positives, and it's not hard to see the appeal of a lot of this.
Part 2. The appeals and the positives.
So, of the big three tropes, the one that's easiest to see the appeal of is the teenage girl badass protagonist. Now, in the past 10 years, these books have definitely been marketed more towards girls. Like, boys can still read them and enjoy them, I certainly have, but it's definitely aimed more at girls, so they have girl protagonists, and that makes sense, but they also want to have them be like, proactive and cool and badass, and they don't want to take shit from anybody. So having them be like a super badass hunter or fighter or chess player or whatever, I don't know. It's an obvious fantasy for people. I was about to say for young girls, but like it's a fantasy for everybody. And in theory, this could be like really empowering. It could give you like a really neat protagonist that you can look up to and say, you know what, I want to be like them, and you just build yourself up using them as an inspiration. The second big trope is the love triangle, and that one is also really easy to see the appeal of and how it could work in a story. Everybody wants to be pursued by whatever sex they're attracted to, And so it's a fantasy for a lot of girls to have two hot guys fawning over them. Like, I get that. I'm not blaming anybody for it. If I had two hot girls fawning over me, I'd certainly be happy about it. That's never happened, but, let's move on from that. The point is that, again, it's kind of a self-insert fantasy. And even if, in reality, if you really did have very strong feelings towards two different people and you were kind of leading them both on, you would be kind of an asshole for doing that. In the land of fiction, we kind of gloss over that, and that's fine. I get it. Especially because it can really help the story as well, because it puts a lot of uncertainty into the direction the plot and the characters are going to go. Like, if there's only one love interest, then usually it's pretty clear that, okay, the main character and the love interest are going to be married and have babies at the end. Or if they don't show an epilogue, they'll at least be, like, in a serious relationship with each other. Whereas with a love triangle, it's not immediately obvious. They could go for either one. If it's done well, at least. Like, the majority of the time, I'm just going to come right out and say, it's not done that well. No one who read Twilight and was super into Twilight seriously thought that Bella and Jacob were going to get married at the end. Like, even the people that wanted Bella and Jacob to get married at the end got to the end, saw her marry Edward, and went, well, I knew it all along. Like, it's just really obvious from the way the plot's set up. But the potential to be not so obvious is still there. And of course, number 3, the rebellion. That's really obvious, especially for young people. We all see injustice in the real world all the time. We see things like poverty, we see corrupt governments and corrupt corporations and politicians, and we want to fight back against them. And we do have some ability to do that in the real world. We can vote and volunteer and stuff, but that usually just doesn't feel as concrete as an actual physical rebellion involving combat and war and all that. That's just kind of the way humans are built. We want to actually see concrete evidence of what we're doing, otherwise we won't really feel like what we're doing matters. And so, just putting it into a concrete form, which most of these books do, really, really helps. And plenty of books have done similar things in the past to get off some really good social commentary. Like, The Hunger Games is pretty clearly about poverty and income inequality. And, you could probably sprinkle in some other stuff in there, but that's the really big commentary on our society today, is that the rich keep getting richer and the poor keep getting poorer. And, this isn't a new phenomenon either. Books like 1984 and Brave New World have been exploring the darker aspects of human psychology and society for years, and they just explore a world where that one aspect has completely taken over and been blown way out of proportion, and it really helps to solidify their commentary on the world we actually live in. So, a book involving a rebellion against some sort of oppressive regime is not a bad idea. Okay, even something like Divergent, you could probably really pick it apart and look at and see, like, okay, I see what they're trying to go for here. Like, I haven't done that before, and I'm certainly not going to do it now, but I'm sure somebody out there could. So these are all good, solid tropes, with a lot of wiggle room in them. You could still do a lot of different stuff with these. But the thing is, they very rarely do. And that brings me to part 3.
Part 3, where it goes wrong.
So there's very rarely any real variation in the execution of these 3 big tropes. And that, at the end of the day, that's where all the problems come back to. Or almost all of them, I should say. Because the fact that I was able to describe those pretty generic tropes at the beginning of this video, and you all knew exactly what I was talking about, that really showcases what the problem is. Like I said a few minutes ago, with a love triangle, there's a lot of potential for uncertainty. However, it's never there. There's never really any uncertainty. You know, if you read The Mortal Instruments, no one really thought that Clary was gonna get with Simon at the end. We all knew she was gonna hook up with Jace, even though for a large portion of the book we thought Jace was her brother, but let's move past that. I don't want to talk about that series. No one really thought that Katniss and Gale were gonna get married at the end of the Hunger Games, like, especially once the third book started and we saw how much of a bad person Gale was becoming. You know? No one thought that Deuce and the evil dude, whose name I don't remember, in Razorland trilogy were actually going to get together, especially because Wolf Dude was a piece of shit. The oppressive government regime is always completely unredeemable in almost all of these books. Like, the only real exception I can think of is the Legend trilogy by Mary Lou. Like, in those books, you can actually tell that, okay, the government does have some good people in it. Like, the government, the police, the military, they're all just kind of trying to do their best. And you see that a lot of them have been influenced or even brainwashed by propaganda, but none of them are really bad people, or very few of them are really bad people. And, you know, there are some corrupt ones that are fucking things up for everybody, but you don't get the impression that everyone involved in this is just pure 100% unadulterated evil. Whereas in things like the Hunger Games, the government is just stupidly evil. Like, they completely oppress all of their citizens in order to enrich a small number of themselves, and they also only give each district one industry to work in, which is probably not great for the economy, but, you know, whatever. That ties into my next point, which is that the world is rarely very believable. You know, like, I mentioned Divergent earlier, like, it just doesn't make sense that people would only really have one dominant personality trait, and that they would split themselves up based on this personality trait. And yeah, I know they give an explanation for it in the last book, but it's still a stupid explanation which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, especially because they specifically took all the genetically damaged people and put them into cities so that they could have kids in hopes that they would make genetically pure people, which doesn't make any sense because you would still have the damaged genes in your body. Like, see what I mean? It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you really think about it and really get down to it. And for a nerd like me who just loves diving into sci-fi and fantasy and post-apocalyptic worlds and just exploring and seeing what's new there, that really bums me out. And of course, the badass teenage protagonist, despite being a badass teenage protagonist, is pretty much never in charge. Now, that makes sense in most cases because, hey, she's a teenager. Like, adults aren't going to trust teenagers to run things. I wouldn't trust a 16-year-old to run a Denny's most of the time, let alone, like, an army or a country. And sometimes this is used effectively, like in the Hunger Games. You know, you see Katniss in the last book, or the last two books really, is just being used as a pawn by other people, and you see how it really affects her, and that, you know, that's done pretty well. But then, in a lot of other cases, like the Razorland trilogy, it feels kind of BS when they actually do come in, become in charge, or in the Mortal Instruments where they're just following the orders of other people and never really being proactive. You know, they're just passive protagonists, and that's really boring. But this gets even worse. Like, it goes to the point where these books will just straight up rip off individual scenes from one another. I mean, for example, there's the rapey first kiss. In my Ash Princess review a couple of days ago, I talked about how Blaze and Theo, their first kiss just comes out of nowhere because Blaze literally walks up to her, doesn't ask permission, doesn't get her permission or anything, and just kisses Theo out of nowhere. And listen, that, like I said, that's just sexual assault, okay? That's illegal, and I don't want to go on some sort of moral crusade or anything, but I really don't think that in something that's marketed towards young people, towards impressionable young people, I don't think that we should be portraying lack of sexual consent as being romantic or as being hot. This also happens in things like, again, the fucking Razorland trilogy, but the evil wolf dude is just straight up a rapist in that, so you know, it makes it kind of worse. Because, again, he pins Deuce against a tree and just starts kissing her against her will, and she gets into it. And, like, you know, that's actually disgusting. It really is. And something else that kind of ties into this, and is really not exclusive to this genre, although none of this is exclusive to YA books, the early love confession. Now, you have a very limited amount of time in a book to develop a relationship. I get that. I really do. Especially if you're trying to do two at once. And, you know, that's part of the problem with the love triangles, that you're kind of hamstringing yourself in that regard, especially when you need to throw in a bunch of action scenes and shit. But it's always way, way too early when one of the characters says, I love you to another. You know, in Ash Princess, Soren and Theo knew each other for a couple of weeks, and they were apart for most of that before he says, I love you. You know, in fucking Mortal Instruments, or Blood Rose Rebellion, or even the Razorland trilogy, which I'm shitting on a lot in this, but honestly I did like the Razorland trilogy, but pretty much all of them, they have the big I love you way, way before way before they've earned it, I should say. You know, you have to build up to that sort of thing, otherwise it just feels hollow. And of course, there's the scene where the pointless side character dies, and it's supposed to be really sad, and, you know, it's treated as though it's like a big fucking deal, and it never is. Like, in Razorland, we had when fucking Evil Wolf guy died, and we're supposed to be like, oh, I'm so sad. I wasn't sad. I didn't care. He didn't have much personality outside of being a rapist, so, you know, I didn't care about that. You have the Mortal Instruments, where Max, the little kid, gets killed, and, you know, that one's a little bit better because you feel sorry for him. He's just a kid. He has no way of defending himself, and he just got caught up in something he didn't understand and wasn't able to fight back against, but he also had, like, no screen time before he got killed, so why the fuck am I supposed to care? I don't. That's the problem. And, of course, Ash Princess, which I really should be bitching about that one more, but I already did a review on it. But anyways, point is, there's a scene in that where a serving girl gets killed. I honestly don't even remember her name. I finished that book less than a week ago. I do not remember what her name was or anything about her personality. I just remember she gets killed at one point, and we're supposed to be like, oh my gosh, that's sad. But, I don't know, the author just couldn't bring herself to actually kill off a major character with some personality. So we're stuck with this. Of course, there's always some sort of dance or ball or masquerade, too. I have no fucking idea why. I honestly don't understand the appeal of this particular thing. Is it supposed to be so that the book seems more like it's set in high school, even though it's not in high school? It just has high school age characters? I don't know, but things like fucking Ash Princess has a masquerade ball which lasts like 20 or 25 pages. It serves no purpose. Literally no purpose. Like, the plot doesn't advance, nothing happens of note, and that's already a pretty long book. You could have cut that very easily. Blood Rose Rebellion, the second book in that, literally starts off with just a giant exposition info dump at a ball or birthday celebration. I don't know, something. It's basically a ball. You know what I'm talking about. And, you know, that one actually at least serves a little bit of a purpose. You know, it's an info dump. It's just really stupid and poorly handled, but it at least had a purpose. And then all these other books, which also have these dance sequences, are, again, usually just pointless. I just don't even get it. And finally, there's never any real moral ambiguity. Like I said before, the government is always irredeemably evil, and very rarely, once in a while, they will say something like, oh, the rebellion's done bad things too, but it's never really that bad. And also, the rebels never, like, have power struggles or purges or anything that normally happens after real civil wars and real revolutions. You know? Like, for a real-life example, look at the Russian Civil War. You know, they started off with an authoritarian regime under Tsar Nicholas, and then they overthrew that, and they wound up with an authoritarian regime under Vladimir Lenin and later Joseph Stalin, which in a lot of ways was worse. So, you know, if you want to be realistic about this sort of thing, or even have any actual impact when shit happens, you should at least try to be morally gray. You know, not this half-assed shit that they do, but you have to at least try. But that's enough complaining for now. Let's go to part 4.
Part 4. How to fix it.
Now, given how long I've spent complaining, you'd think the solution to this problem would be really difficult. It's actually not. You just have to stop buying books that fit into these stereotypes. Really, just think about it. These books are made by companies and authors that are going after money. You know, they're doing this because it sells at the end of the day. It might not sell as well as it used to, but they're still making some sort of cash off of it. And so what I'm asking you, hypothetical watchers, is to just do a lot more research and be a lot more critical when you see something like Ash Princess. You know, I haven't been doing this enough. I've given books too many chances just since I started this channel even. And, you know, I've spent too much of my money on it, and I've given too much reward to people that just don't try anymore. You know, so what I want you to do is I want you to look at the cover, the title, read the summary, and if it sounds like generic shit, don't assume that it's going to be different, because it's not. I think we should all know at this point, if it seems like it's not trying, then it's not trying. But if it's a little bit sneakier, which, you know, sometimes they get you, I want you to pull out your smartphone, we all have them, and just look up the book, find some more information on it. If every review is talking about how, yeah, it's still cliched, still stupid, blah, 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 then just don't buy it. You know, you already know what it's going to be. You've read that same story a million times before, and there's much better books out there, okay? Maybe not in this genre necessarily. Like, there's still some good ones. I still like The Hunger Games. I still like Razorland. But, you know, just branch out into other stuff. You know, read stuff like the Stormlight Archives or The Expanse. Or, you know, pick up a romance novel or a thriller or a mystery or something. You know, there's millions of books out there for you to read that you can get. And those books have hard work put into them. They have effort put into them. And, you know, as long as we keep rewarding shittiness and laziness and just a lack of effort, that's all we're going to get in return. Okay? So we kind of have to starve the beast just a little bit before they get the message and they start trying to get their editors and their authors to do something a little bit different.
Part 5. Conclusion.
Okay, so I've bitched enough. I would just like to make a couple of quick announcements here. Number one, I am most likely going to finish the Blood Rose Rebellion series because, try as I might, I can't look away from that fucking train wreck. You know, I'm pretty sure that series is going to be a trilogy. If it is a trilogy, I'll just read the last book and, you know, that'll be done. If it's going to be like 4 or 5 books, I won't read anymore. You know, I've already spent too much of my time and too much of my money on that, so whatever. And when I say I'm done with young adult books, I only really mean the dystopian sci-fi fantasy ones, because those are the ones that really apply to this video. The more contemporary ones, those are still usually pretty alright, and even if they aren't good, they have more variation in them. Or, hell, maybe I just haven't read enough and I haven't picked up on the patterns and tropes yet, but to me at least, they're better and more original. In fact, my next review is going to be on a book like that, so don't worry too much about that. Will I be reviewing a sequel to Dread Nation or the rest of the Young Elite books? Probably not. The jury's still kind of out because, you know, I thought both of those were actually pretty alright books in their own way, but I don't know if I'm invested enough in them to move on and read the rest of a series about them. How long will this break from young adult books last? Probably at least 6 months to a year, I think. Like, and that's not that long in the grand scheme of things, and I really don't think that me making this video is going to cause a huge boycott or anything that will cause them to immediately shift their whole business model, but I hope it helps a little bit. You know, like I said, as long as we accept laziness and mediocrity, as long as we reward that, that's all we're going to get in return. So, please, if you watch all of this, thank you, and please subscribe, but also, just please be critical about the sort of stuff that you read, and make sure that you're not rewarding people that aren't putting in any effort. I guess this is the part where I think of a conclusion, so